Shop, episode 125, Finding Confidence in Conflict with Kwame Christian. Hey everybody, and welcome to another episode of Keys to the Shop, where we give you insights, inspiration, and the tools you need to grow as a coffee service professional. My name is Christy Furio. I'm your host for the show, and I am really excited to have you on today because the guest and the content of today's conversation is just fantastic. If you're a fan of being able to successfully advocate for yourself and for your company when it comes time to negotiate or manage conflict, I think we all are, then you're going to love this conversation today on finding confidence in conflict with Kwame Christian. We're talking about negotiation. We're talking about advocating for yourself and for your business effectively. Those are two items that we can always become a little bit better at. And Kwame, with his new book, Nobody Will Play With Me, helps us just really lay hold of some techniques and best practices for winning the internal and external game of negotiations. Now, this episode today is brought to you by Prima Coffee. Now, of course, Prima Coffee is a leading specialty coffee equipment supplier who curates the best equipment from around the world to fit perfectly with the needs of their enthusiast and professional customers. Helping you succeed in making great coffee at home or in the shop is what drives them. So if you're looking for the best equipment and expert assistance to go along with it, then look no further than prima-coffee.com. And from now until December 31st, customers can receive a Maser Mini grinder, an electronic version in silver, entirely for free with their Astoria espresso machine purchase. Simply add the machine and grinder to your cart to see instant savings. This is an incredible deal for anyone looking to set up a new shop. So again, get a free Maser Mini electronic in silver entirely for free when you purchase an Astoria espresso machine up until December 31st. Go to prima-coffee.com, find out more about that. When you check out, let them know that Keys to the Shop sent you along. My thanks to Prima for their support of Keys to the Shop. This episode is also brought to you by Pacific Foods, the folks behind the Barista Series line of non-dairy performance beverages. Those are designed specifically for professional baristas and the standards for excellence that they demand. So you could be on bar using the coconut, rice, soy, almond, or oat milk. Whatever you choose, its ability to take the heat from steaming and produce an unmatched silky texture in your lattes and cappuccinos. Plus, it keeps the flavor balance focused on coffee. All that makes it a perfect choice for your cafe's menu. Pacific is a huge supporter of specialty coffee and the barista community. These products are just one of the clear evidences of that. So I would definitely recommend go to pacificfoods.com to learn more about how the Barista Series line of non-dairy performance beverages can really help elevate the non-dairy offerings in your cafe. So thank you very much, Pacific, for your support of Keys to the Shop. All right, so today we are going to be talking about confidence in conflict. We're talking about negotiations and how we can become better advocates for ourselves and for our businesses, while at the same time being empathetic and winning the war of emotions that is both within us and between us and the other party. You know, we have this problem, maybe especially in the service industry, because we're always putting each other's needs before ourselves. We can do that to a fault, and we do get taken advantage of as a result. We've been told, and we tell ourselves, I think, that we can't advocate for ourselves without coming off kind of smarmy and a little greasy, like that slick, salesy way of being that we don't necessarily like. It feels uncomfortable to us. That's more or less a myth that we've been taught to just accept. And as a result, the companies that we run and the careers that we plan or don't plan aren't as good as they could be. So being good at negotiation and having confidence in conflict is something that we definitely need in the specialty coffee world. And it's not just for owners, it's for baristas too. So we're talking about negotiating a lease or negotiating a raise for yourself as a barista. Whatever it is, we're always engaging in it one way or another. And why not do it well and have a clear conscience about it? And that's the result that I hope you get at the end of this episode today with my guest, Kwame Christian. I'm so excited to have Kwame on the show. He is just extraordinarily talented in these areas. He is the director of the American Negotiation Institute, where he puts on workshops designed to make difficult conversations easier. He is an attorney and a mediator with a Bachelor's of Arts in Psychology and a Master's of Public Policy and a law degree. So Kwame brings a unique multidisciplinary approach to the topic of conflict management and negotiation. Now, on top of all this, he is the author of the new best-selling book, Nobody Will Play With Me, How to Use Compassionate Curiosity to Find Confidence in Conflict. And he has a TEDx talk called Finding Confidence in Conflict. That was the most popular TED Talk on the topic of conflict in 2017. He also hosts the top negotiation podcast in the country called Negotiate Anything. The show has been downloaded over 500,000 times and has listeners in 181 different countries. So obviously, Kwame brings a world of experience in not just theory about negotiations and conflict and mediation, but in practice in many different areas of life. And this is just a gold mine of practical, applicable knowledge that is going to directly benefit your career and your business. So I'm excited to share this with you. Let's get right to it. Here now is my conversation with Kwame Christian. Kwame, how are you? Welcome to Keys to the Shop.
I am great, Chris. Thanks for the invite.
Yeah, really honored to have you on the show, and congrats on the new book.
Thank you very much. It was not an easy process, but I am glad to get it done, and I'm glad to see that people are enjoying it.
Yeah, I was just going to ask, how is it being received in the market?
It's been great. It's been really humbling, seeing the reviews come up from people that I don't know at all, finding value in the book. It's been really great to see that. So it's, as a podcaster, it's always a new adventure to reach a new audience through a new medium. And so I was a little bit apprehensive about that. But thus far, it's been received very well.
Great. That's good to hear. I mean, you've got so many great thoughts on this topic throughout the different episodes of your podcast. And of course, in your career, you've had so much opportunity to hone your skills at this craft in negotiation and mediation and things like that. How did you come to be, well, let's say, an expert in negotiations and mediating conflict?
I think this will surprise most people. It started in undergrad. And so my degree is in psychology. I wanted to be a clinical psychologist for the longest time. And then sometime in junior year, I was walking down campus and I tripped. And then I woke up and I was like, wait, I'm a lawyer now? I'm in law school? What happened? So it was a bit of a complete shift. But I've always been obsessed with psychology. And so for me, with the way that I approach conflict management and negotiation, for me, it's all about the psychology of persuasion. That's the foundation. And then my experience as a mediator, as an attorney, and negotiating business deals, that came later. But it's my obsession and fascination with psychology, and not just psychology as it applies to persuading other people, but psychology as it applies to yourself as a negotiator and the psychological and emotional barriers that we face in the negotiation. That's really what's fascinating to me.
So you just dove into it using that as an anchor and decided that, I mean, you've got a podcast about this now and now a book. So this looks like something that you've seen be successful in your career. What is the goal is in writing this book? Is it to sort of encapsulate all of those experiences into this manual for people to benefit the way you've benefited from it?
Yes-ish. Yes-ish. Really, I think this is going to be the first of many. because it needs to, there needs to be a progression. And so I think a lot of times when it comes to the content that I've provided and a lot of other negotiation experts have provided, we make the mistake of giving recipes to people who are afraid to get in the kitchen. It doesn't matter if we give people techniques and strategies and tactics if they're too afraid to use them. And this goes back to my psychology days. So I wanted to be a clinical psychologist, like I said. And so when I realized that the majority of my listeners were not focused on the strategic issues with negotiation, they were worried about the level of confidence they have in difficult conversations and fear and anxiety. That was their biggest barrier. It allowed me to just completely pivot. And so now I focus on our psychology first, what we can do to improve our confidence and move forward. And so I think that's one of the differentiating factors when it comes to the way that I approach it in my trainings and with the podcast compared to other people, because the real issue that people are struggling with is their own barrier to engaging wholeheartedly in these difficult conversations.
Wow, that's a great point. I mean, it's like when people are afraid of driving, they could be following all the rules, but still be a danger to themselves and others.
Exactly. Exactly.
So confidence is what is in the title of your book, Nobody Will Play With Me. The kind of compassionate curiosity framework and creating confidence in conflict is the point of the book. And I'm curious about the compassionate curiosity part of the book. What do you mean by compassionate curiosity as a framework of approaching these types of situations where you need to be confident in these conflicts?
First of all, when it comes to the framework, and the benefit of having a framework is that it gives you guidance, and it gives you a lens through which you can see the entire interaction. And it helps you not only to know what to focus on, but really more importantly, what to ignore, because there's a lot of data coming at you, and it's easy to get distracted and go down the wrong path. And so it helps you to focus on what's important, and also helps you to ignore the things that are not important. And so what I wanted to do with the compassionate curiosity framework was introduce a tool that people can use in any difficult conversation, whether it's a negotiation or a heated conflict, at home, at work, anywhere. It is the same 3 steps. And what's really cool about it is that it's not just the same 3 steps for the actual conversation with the other party. It's also the same 3 steps in the negotiation you have with yourself before the difficult conversation happens. Because we've heard people say it's important to negotiate with yourself, and we intuitively know that's right. We understand that there's something that needs to happen in our heads beforehand, but nobody really has operationalized that process. And that's what the compassionate curiosity framework allows us to do. And so the 3 steps are: first, acknowledge emotions; second, get curious with compassion; and lastly, engage in joint problem solving. And that is what you do internally and externally.
The psychology part of this, again, is really coming up heavily. This is your wheelhouse. And in these 3 steps, it's obvious that we start with your psychology. And why is that important? Why is that the jumping off point?
Because one of the things that I've recognized is that when it comes to these difficult conversations, we don't have a clear understanding of ourselves before we engage in it. And so not just ourselves substantively in terms of what we want to get out of the conversation in terms of outcomes, but also in terms of where we are emotionally and why we feel that way. And so when it comes to acknowledging emotions, we need to figure out the root of the feeling that we're experiencing. What is it? And a lot of times we focus on the negatives. Okay, I'm upset, I'm scared, I'm lonely. That's what I'm feeling. But also there are positives. Sometimes we want to be affirmed. Sometimes we think we don't get the respect we deserve, and that's what's causing the issue. We want more respect, so we're moving towards something positive, and that's what's causing the dissonance that we're feeling. And it's important to know that, because as we move through the process, we'll see that there are going to be emotional needs and there are going to be substantive needs. And sometimes you can satisfy your substantive needs in a logical way while completely abandoning what you need emotionally. And so in my mediations, what I've seen sometimes is that people can be offered a deal that makes sense legally. It gives them the legal protection that they want, and it makes sense economically. They are in a better position economically now, but there's something that's not okay with them. It's not sitting right. And so what I do as a mediator is I walk them through this process. I help them to acknowledge their own emotions. I help them to engage in compassionate curiosity with themselves. And the importance of compassion in this case, when it comes to yourself, is that sometimes we're our own worst critics. We judge ourselves very harshly. And so it's easy for you to say, well, I shouldn't feel this way. There should be no emotions in business. And so we cut the analysis short, and that's problematic. So we need to look at ourselves without judgment and inquire deeply in order to figure out what we need emotionally. And then in the third step, when it comes to the joint problem solving, this probably sounds weird to people. Well, it's just me who's the other party here. Well, what we're doing in this last step internally is we're getting our heart and mind on the same page. What is it that I need substantively? What is it that I need emotionally? And what solutions can I produce in the subsequent negotiation externally that satisfy both of those needs?
Wow. So this is sort of, it's having a conversation with yourself, so to speak, but in a guided framework that allows you to process things that you don't give yourself the opportunity to process, because obviously it seems like we tend to think of negotiations and conflict as something to be handled pretty hastily to relieve the tension and treat it, like you said, like it's just business and no emotions involved. So it kind of, we don't get the solutions we want, and the other people probably also are impacted in a negative way that's unnecessary. So it probably makes it harder for you to get what you want when you're pushing people away because of your own lack of healthy processing. So is compassionate curiosity is something that also allows the other party to return the same kind of empathetic approach to problem solving.
Exactly. And so before this call, listeners, Chris and I were talking about our our escapades as parents. I have a 3-year-old, Chris has a 5-year-old. And so as parents, I think it gives us a really great opportunity to see the major players in the brain operate. And so think about your child when he's having a tantrum. Is there anything logically that he can process at that time? No. Mm-hmm. When he's fussing and fighting and red in the face and crying profusely, we understand that he is not able to process well. And so that's the amygdala. It's one of the most primitive parts of our brain. And it is where we have our emotions, both positive and negative, but mostly negative. And when the amygdala is firing full force, it is almost impossible for us to use our prefrontal cortex, which is where the logical thinking part of our brain happens. It's one or the other. And so when you are really emotionally triggered, you can't think logically. And so this process for you helps you to move to the more logical part of your brain. So you are in a better mindset when you're actually having the negotiation. And then now you can see when we go to the external negotiation why it's so important to acknowledge the emotions and then go through these steps before we talk about the substance. Because oftentimes at the beginning of these conversations, the other person is emotionally triggered. And the reason I always talk about children is because they get highly emotional and they can't control it because their brain isn't fully developed. That part of the brain doesn't go away. We're just able to veil what we're feeling in professionalism. So even if somebody is comporting themselves in a professional manner, there can still be this emotional residue that is there that's preventing them from processing things on the deeper level. So that's why it's so important to go through these steps with people externally as well, because you walk them from that highly emotionally triggered state to a more logically evolved and developed state by the end of the conversation, so you could actually talk about logic and talk about the substance of the issue at hand.
It sounds logical as you talk about it, and in the midst of that conflict, it's got to be pretty difficult to discipline yourself to apply a framework when you've got your amygdala knocking at the door So having a book like this detail it is a good kind of preemptive strategy, it seems, to keep it at bay. And it sounds like maybe the stuffing down of or lack of acknowledging the emotional realities of these things is part of the reason why we're bad at conflict and negotiations. Like, why is it that we, on the whole, I'd say, are pretty we underperform when it comes to dealing with these types of things?
The first reason is we haven't been taught this. This isn't like once I explain this and people it makes sense. You can see it in your everyday life. It makes sense, but it's not intuitive. You couldn't just walk down the street and say, "Oh, I bet there's an amygdala in there," if you haven't heard of it. And so the issue is that most of us haven't been taught how to manage conflict. Even though conflict is an inevitability of human interaction, I think it's the biggest oversight in our education system. We just have not been taught it. That's the first thing. And then when we matriculate into the workforce, oftentimes when it comes to emotions, we are taught that there's no emotion in business. We should become robotic in these interactions, and it is unprofessional to have emotions. But the thing is, as humans, they don't go away. We can pretend they're not there, but they are there. And so if we feel inhibited when we feel emotional, we feel like we are not being professional. So we hide that. And so then the other person is hiding it as well. And so now we're trying to pretend as if it's not there, but it's usually one of the biggest issues in the negotiation. And then lastly, for men, we have been raised in this society, in most societies, to not wrestle with our emotions on a deeper level. And so it's particularly difficult for men, especially when they matriculate into the leadership positions, to connect with the people who they lead emotionally as well. So there are a number of things acting against us when it comes to our ability to navigate these difficult conversations effectively.
Oh, wow. That's powerful, because it seems like we would project that expectation of ourselves not to have emotions onto other people and not handle their emotions well as a result.
Exactly. And not only not handle their emotions well, what makes it even worse is that we often shame people for having their emotions. We would tell them to calm down. You shouldn't feel this way. It's not that big of a deal. And when you say these things, what happens? We get more upset.
Oh, man.
It's like, now it has become a bigger deal. So just denying its existence and then shaming people when when it does bubble to the surface, those are the worst things you can do, because whether we want them to be there or not, they're going to be there. And so this framework allows you to walk through that. And it's really simple. It is a very simple framework. And I was talking to another mediator, and she said when things get heated in her mediations, she just thinks of the term compassionate curiosity, and it affects the way that she interacts with people positively. And I think that's the biggest benefit of this framework, because other tactics, they definitely work. They definitely work well, but they are hard to retrieve. And so when we are triggered, we don't think as clearly. And so it's less likely for us to first find those strategies that are deep within the recesses of our brain and then execute them effectively. This is super simple, and it works in every single conflict, whether at work or at home. And I think that the simplicity of it makes it more likely for you to actually use it.
Great. So you're talking about people who, if they're buying this book and they're wanting to apply this, the chances are that there's an issue with not allowing themselves to, acknowledge emotions and walk through these types of things in a healthy way. And it kind of brings me to a question which I think is really on the minds of people, especially who are hourly workers, who have lots of bosses, but maybe themselves are not a boss, or even somebody who's just newly promoted to a position of manager who feels they have authority, they don't know how to use it, but they know they want to please the people who have hired them. And so pleasing people oftentimes leads to allowing yourself to be taken advantage of, and we're taught and maybe shamed into the idea that we can't fight or shouldn't fight for something that we want. How do we get over the hurdle mentally of feeling selfish for fighting for something that we want.
The timing of this is really interesting. I'm reading a book right now that talked about the fact that animal owners are more likely to achieve compliance with veterinary recommendations with regard to medicine, taking your medicine for their animals than they are for themselves. And oftentimes, just people in general, we treat the ones we love better than we treat ourselves. And so for a lot of people, advocating for themselves for whatever reason is incredibly difficult. So maybe you were raised in a situation where you were taught to be humble, which is a good thing. And good things come to those who wait. And you work hard, keep your nose down, and get your work done, and things will happen. And those are all very good virtues. Similarly, women are often put in a situation where socially they can be stigmatized for standing up for themselves because they have been socialized in a way that almost prevents them from advocating for themselves. So for instance, men are socialized in a way that allows them to be more competitive. So think about the games that boys usually play. Tag, we play sports, things like that. There is a clear winner, and the winner becomes the winner because of some level of superiority or asserting themselves in a certain way. But then when little girls are playing, often they play socially conscious games. So things like playing with dolls, playing house, those type of things. The goal is social cohesion. And now oftentimes if a girl wants to go play with the boys, a well-meaning adult would say, no, that's not what girls do. Girls do this. Mm-hmm. And so throughout their lives, they're constantly being shepherded into roles that are more social and communal. And they are taught to take care of others before they are taking care of themselves. And so for people who have these types of upbringing, one of the things that you can do is you can change your mindset to say to yourself, okay, I am not advocating for myself here. I'm going to play the role of my attorney. What would my attorney do or say in this conversation? Or oftentimes what we do if I'm coaching an executive who is a mother, what I say is, well, if your daughter was in this position, if your son was in this position, would you want your son to stand up for themselves? Would you stand up and advocate on their behalf? Absolutely. Just yes, absolutely. Well, I want you to pretend that you are now your mother. How would you advocate for yourself in this situation? And that simple shift in mentality instead of thinking of yourself as yourself, to think of yourself as your own advocate, often helps people to advocate for themselves. And another thing, when it comes to the terminology we use in these situations, I think it becomes really daunting when we think of it in terms of fighting for ourselves. Instead, we can think about it as a collaborative conversation, because if you're working for a company and you want to advance, you want to move forward, maybe you're asking for a raise, or you want to change the circumstances, you're not only doing that for yourself, you believe that you have the skills necessary to improve the company. And really, the company would benefit by your advancement as well. And so framing the conversation in that collaborative way will take that edge off of you, because you don't feel as though you're fighting, because fighting implies that you're against the other person. Thinking about it in terms of a collaborative type of engagement makes it easier for you to actually engage in the conversation, and it decreases the level of threat or the perception of threat that the other person will see when they look at you when you come to the table.
Yeah, because they might have some kind of triggering response to people who are advocating for themselves, because they might not know how to do that for themselves either. So they immediately are going to think of it in the negative, because that's the way they view it for themselves.
Exactly. And with this approach, the softer approach, where you're genuinely curious and you genuinely want to address their emotions and serve their interest as well as for yourself, it is hard for the person to frame that in a negative way. Mm-hmm. And so that's the benefit. It brings the best out of you and the best out of them.
I think that we need to talk about the idea that negotiations are not just for corporate environments, because I think when I think of negotiations, when I think of conflict resolutions and mediation and those types of words, I don't think of those things as my territory because I'm just a worker, or I take orders, etc. And it's not something that a lower level role would necessarily engage in. Is that misguided? And as a thought, why would it be that we kind of think that way?
I think we think that way because negotiation has been branded poorly. And so the way that I define a negotiation is any conversation where somebody in the conversation wants something. And so that is intentionally broad because it helps you to recognize that every day we're negotiating, every single day. And the people with whom we negotiate the most are the people who are closest to us. So our spouse, our kids, our colleagues, our managers. Those are the types of conversations that would qualify as negotiations, and they're always happening. And so the reality is, whether you want to or not, you're going to be negotiating. You're going to be negotiating every day. It's just a question of whether or not you're going to do it well. And so I think the important thing, like the most important thing for people to get out of this conversation is the fact that you cannot avoid these negotiations. They are going to happen. And so we should look at every single conversation we have as a strategic opportunity. And with negotiation, I see there as being three goals. So first goal, to get more of what we want. That is the offensive use of negotiation and what we classically think of as negotiations. The second thing would be the defensive uses of negotiations, which is where we use negotiation to avoid things that we don't want. And then the third goal is using negotiation to strengthen the relationships with the people around us. And even if we're not able to use negotiation offensively, and even if we're not able to use it defensively, in every single interaction, we can use it to strengthen the relationship. And if we start thinking strategically, we will interact in these conversations in a more nuanced way, constantly moving the needle forward in every single interaction.
Awesome. Well said. So I want to talk about a situation that I think would really warrant the application of these thoughts, this framework. And that situation, I think we find ourselves in coffee a lot, which is we start as baristas and we look around us and say, we want to advance. And for the barista, the classic advancement is, I want to become either a trainer or a manager. And there's other areas in the cafe, of course, but they are required to work their shifts week in, week out. There's a rhythm, and so there's this you have to break free from that and free your mind and approach your boss. And like, how would you go about, if you're an hourly worker, wanting to get put yourself up for a position or talk about advancement in a company? How would the compassionate curiosity framework get applied here to help them successfully move up? What are some techniques they could use?
The first thing that we need to do is we need to recognize the negotiable points. Where are the opportunities to negotiate? And also think strategically about the goal that we have. So we have a very clear understanding of where the ultimate goal is. But then we need to break that ultimate goal, becoming a trainer or becoming a manager, into smaller incremental goals. Because it's not just day one barista, day two trainer or manager. There is a progression. And so I think about negotiation as a never-ending game of chess. We're constantly positioning ourselves with the people around us to move ourselves in the direction that we ultimately want to go. So that's the first thing. We need to recognize that every single day we have an opportunity to negotiate and move ourselves forward. And then with regard to the compassionate curiosity framework, we just use that in every single daily interaction. I like to think of this in terms of mini negotiations or micro negotiations. And so it's not the ultimate conversation where our manager brings us into the office and says, hey, thinking about making you manager, thinking about this salary. What is it? That's what we often think about when we think about negotiations. But let's break that down into the smaller conversations. So I walk in first day, then I can think about it. Where do I want him or her to go psychologically in order for me to put myself in the best position for the next day? And so day one, I want to focus on building trust. So what can I do and how can I interact with this person to start to build trust? And that would be the micro negotiation for the day. And so that conversation might be acknowledging the emotion. So Chris, you're going to be my manager here. So step one, acknowledging the emotion. And notice that there is not an actual big negotiation or issue to be resolved, number one, and not a conflict at hand. We're still using it because in this conversation, we want something. It makes it a negotiation. So, Chris, thank you again for this opportunity. I really appreciate it. And I am looking forward to the opportunity to learn from you because I've seen the work that you've done in the past. And this is something I'm passionate about. And I know you can help to take me to the next level. And so since there's no negative emotion to acknowledge, I'm going to acknowledge the positive emotion. Chris, you think you're good. Okay. So I want you to know that. And so I'm going to acknowledge that emotion. And so then we move into the compassionate curiosity framework. So I'm asking questions. So what are some things that you think I should do in this role to make sure that I'm successful? If in 1 year from now I've advanced, what would you need to see from me day to day in terms of improvement to move forward? And so that's gathering information, asking questions. And so when it comes to the problem solving part of this, there really isn't any problems to solve. You've gathered information and you've already established more trust, and we're done. The analysis is done. And then we move on to the next day. And so we're constantly looking at every single interaction we have with these people as an opportunity to move forward. And then if an issue actually occurs, then we go through the model in a more robust way. But this gives us a model that we can use and overlay every single conversation that we have.
That's brilliant. Absolutely critical to break it down like that in those small increments, because those affect the way that you are seen by leadership and even the way that you see yourself, so that you can position yourself in a confident way later on. It seems like as a manager, I can attest to, or as someone who's spent time in management, I can attest to the fact that oftentimes when employees will talk to you about things like that, it forces you to think more deeply about it than you may have thought before. Because if the company doesn't have a upward mobility, like a track for advancement, and somebody's asking specifically about it, you never know. As a barista, you might actually spark something for the very first time in that company and give them an excuse to actually develop that on your behalf.
Exactly.
Yeah,
that's brilliant.
You also, and we also, I think, in working, and you've probably seen this a lot too with people who need to have people advocate or teach them to advocate for themselves. We tend to want to have people see us without us basically putting ourselves out there, and then we start this kind of self-pity, like, oh, nobody sees me, and we just kind of chalk it up to people not caring, and we move on to a different company. Is that something that you see a lot, like people just kind of fading into the background and hoping that somebody just randomly discovers them?
Yes. I see that all the time, and I used to be that guy too. But I recognize that we don't get what we deserve. We get what we ask for. And usually the negotiation just starts with you asking a question. And oftentimes that's it. You might just ask for what you want and you might get it. And like you said, sometimes the person in charge of you, it's not that they are overlooking you, actively overlooking you. They're busy. They have their own life. They are busy making sure that the business keeps on progressing. And then when they go home, they're busy with family stuff. That's a lot. And so you need to constantly put yourself at the front of the line and at the front of their mind through this process. And it gives you a way to do this in a way that's more structured. And the thing is, too, one of the best negotiation techniques, especially that you can use, especially if you are negotiating with somebody that has more experience or more power, is simply asking for advice. You just ask for their advice. You say, this is my goal. I respect where you are. You're smart. How would you get there if you were in my position? What should I do? And then you do that. And the thing is, because everybody has a different answer. And so how sometimes you might be in class as a student, and the professor asks a question, and then everybody's guessing and the question's wrong. And then the professor gives an answer that only existed in her head. It was only in their head. It's like, what? How was I ever going to know that?
Right.
And now when I present, I see the joy in doing that. I'm like, oh, this is fun. But what we're doing is we are allowing them to reveal the pathway that we need to take in order to accomplish what we want to accomplish. And at the same time, you're having what's called the IKEA effect. And what they found is that when somebody takes furniture and they build it themselves, they care about it more because they had to work harder to complete the process. And not only that, when they look at the furniture, they see themselves in it because they saw that they put work into it. And so now when they look at you and your success, now they see themselves in it. It's like, wow, I told Chris what he should do. He did that. Of course I'm going to give him the promotion, because this is not just Chris's success. This is a reflection of my brilliance.
You play to the ego a little bit there.
Exactly.
Oh, yeah. So what you're saying here is just amazing, and is, I think, and I hope, is something that more baristas in particular, and even just managers or people in coffee shops are doing more of. I've seen it changing over the years, which is great, and this is a fantastic way to approach it. It is also a long game, and it's a long game because you can see your boss or a boss on a semi-regular basis. They're a decision maker that you have access to, but that's not always the case when, say, you're in a high-stakes negotiation in a retail setting with something like collections from an overdue wholesale account, or negotiations in a lease, or in a more official, technically corporate climate. And so I want to ask for those who are engaging not in the more soft skills, so to speak, based negotiations, but in the more like, here's the paper, here's the dotted line type negotiations. How does this framework apply to the average owner when they're approaching those situations?
Now, Chris, this is where it gets fun. Because remember, this is now we're into the business law section. We're negotiating deals, and this is what I really like to do. Mm-hmm. And so essentially with this framework, what we do is, this is the foundation that we utilize throughout the conversation. And one of a saying that I love is that you don't rise to the success. You don't rise to the level of success that is equivalent to your highest abilities. You drop to the level of your systems. And so what this framework does is it allows you to make sure that you will not drop below a certain level. And so whenever you're lost in a conversation, okay, compassionate curiosity until I get my feedback. And so on top of the framework, which is the foundation of this negotiation, what we're going to do is now we're going to layer on some more robust persuasive techniques, because now we're not only just trying to get through the conversation and build the relationship. We want to get more. We are trying to win, and so in that situation, now we're going to try to be more strategically persuasive. So we're going to utilize some of the classic techniques like anchoring, the foot in the door technique, those types of things, in order to be more aggressive to get better deals and focus on closing those deals. And if we have time, I could go through a couple of those strategies that I think would be particularly important for coffee shops too.
Oh, be my guest. Yeah.
Okay, so I think anchoring is the most important and most powerful negotiation technique that we can use. And so essentially what we're doing with anchoring is we are changing the reference point for the conversation. And so let's say we're purchasing paper goods from a company, and what they're offering is, they say, you can get this number for $10,000 a month. Okay, great. That's the starting point. And so what they have done is they've started the conversation, and wherever the negotiation goes, we know that it's going to be relatively close to that $10,000 mark. Now, what you would do, let's say you had a friend who said, yep, I'm the same size as your company. We got a deal for $10,000. Now we know that's around where they're going to get. And so what you do is you start the conversation and you say, what I'm hoping to get for this is a deal of about $8,000. And so what we're doing is we're starting the conversation in a new place. And so this seems subtle, but it is deceptively powerful. So here's an example. So they did a study where they broke people up into two groups. And so they asked the two groups similar but different questions. So for the first group, let's call them Group A, they were asked, do you think Gandhi was older or younger than 140 when he died? Okay, ridiculous question. He was younger. Okay, great. Now for Group B, what they said was, do you think Gandhi was older or younger than the age of 13 when he died? Okay, again, obvious. We would say he's older than 13. And then they asked both groups the exact same question. How old do you think Gandhi was when he died? And so what they found was, on average, the group that was primed with 140 guessed an age that was on average 20 years older than Group B. And they were primed with a nonsensical number. And that just demonstrates that we are so sensitive to the starting points of these conversations that even when it is ridiculous, we will be primed and it'll have a psychological impact. And what's fascinating is that if you ask those people after the fact, they would say that it had no impact on their guess. They wouldn't feel it. And so what we want to do when we anchor is we want to make sure that it passes the because test. You want to be able to say, I'm asking for $8,000 because, and you need to be able to utilize objective, legitimate criteria. So objective, this is something that comes from a third party that is not yourself, that's unbiased. And then legitimate, something that would be respected by both parties. And so what you might say is, I did some research and I saw this article recently talking about the industry, your particular industry, and I saw that the prices were down. And based on what we've been quoted before, we think $8,000 would be a fair price. And that's where you start the negotiation. And then what you'll find is you might end up with a deal that's $9,000, $9,500. But whatever it is, especially on these monthly expenses where the benefits accrue over time, where every month there's you're going to be taxed on this, that's where you see the major benefits of negotiation. And so anchoring is something that you should try to do every single time you negotiate. And in order to do it effectively, you need to be the first person making the offer.
Oh, that's great. And you're right. It accrues over time, and every little nickel and dime counts in the coffee business. When you're pricing a cappuccino, you're pricing it because of cups and lids and condiments. And if you can just get a better deal on things like the lid itself, or in one case, I remember once I asked for cheaper. I just asked for a cheaper price on milk, and they gave it to me.
Right.
And I was so shocked. And I thought, it's been 2 years since, I've been like ordering milk, and I never thought to just simply ask for a cheaper price. And I didn't ask for it in a meekish way. I just said, like, I need a better price. I want to see what you can do for me, and go from there. And it's interesting that they were both trained to help me get what I need as salespeople, but also they need to advocate for their company too. So that's an interesting predicament to be in on their end.
Exactly. And think about it too. When you're negotiating with salespeople, they want to close deals. They want to close these sales because they want the commission. The difference between the commission on $9,000 and commission on $10,000 is relatively minimal. But the difference between $9,000 and $10,000 for your company is significant. And so what I found when I'm negotiating with sales teams is they feel like they're always negotiating from behind. They feel as though they always need to make concessions in order to close the deal. And so if you're a savvy company, you recognize this a bit of a psychological weakness, and you can exploit it. And you can get better deals simply by asking for more and more and more. And anchoring is one of those techniques that you could use. And so also remember what I said earlier. The ability to negotiate and manage conflict is the thing that hasn't been taught in schools. And so most likely the person on the other side, they might have experience negotiating, but they haven't diligently practiced their skills. And so by thinking about it on a deeper level and actually reading books and doing these training seminars, you can improve, and it gives you a competitive advantage when you're trying to procure these goods for your company.
It is a really important thing that you're discussing here, because so much of what opportunity there is in your business passes by you because of the lack of activating yourself to just put yourself forward, like you said in the earlier negotiations about getting promoted in a cafe, and in these conversations too, like discussing in depth the price of little things in the cafe, purchasing little things that make a big difference. As we're discussing this, I can feel myself asking the question, so I bet you that some others are asking this too. We work in a coffee culture where we value community in relationships, and we like the people who are our salespeople. We like the people who deliver our milk. And part of us feels wrong for pushing and pushing and pushing for these things. And we don't want to be the person that people talk about when the phone hangs up and they're like, geez, they called again about prices. Is there a downside to this? Can you overdo this type of approach?
Yes. Yes, you can. Yes, you can. But it's a matter of degree. Doing it once isn't a problem. Doing it twice isn't a problem. It depends on the circumstance. And really, it depends on the way you do it. What's interesting is, so my law school was the top-ranked negotiation program in the country for law schools. And the scholars that went there that were teaching, I remember one of the people who was one of my professors was a former attorney general of Ohio. So they're involved in high-level negotiations. They are the nicest people in the world. The nicest people in the world. And it was just always so shocking to me that I see them and they're so friendly and everybody loves them. But then if you put them on the table, they get what they want. And then the people who they were negotiating with love them too. Like, what is this magic that these people have? And so you can see with the framework, if somebody comes to you and is asking about how you're feeling and demonstrates true compassion and is trying to learn more about the problems you have and tries to get a better deal, framing it in that way and approaching it that way, it's hard not to like them. And so you need to stay in your authentic self, and you still want to maintain those relationships. That's a critical element in this approach. But at the same time, you still advocate for yourself. And the thing is, you're not putting the people out of business. They're still getting the deal. They want your business. You're still giving it to them. You just want a little bit more. Mm-hmm. And by taking a little bit more on these deals, or I shouldn't say taking, I should say by negotiating for more, you're not taking money out of their pocket. You're taking money out of the person who owns the business that you don't know. Go ahead, take their money. It doesn't matter. But you can do it in a way while you still maintain a strong working relationship with the other side.
This is such a critical conversation to have. It's so many businesses suffer needlessly, both in the morale of their people or the operations and the profit that they could be making but aren't, by not applying some type of logical steps to the way that they approach conflict and negotiations. And I think this is a critical book for people to pick up and learn the compassionate curiosity framework. And I wonder if you have any final thoughts for us to chew on as we go and consider the conversation today. How do we become better negotiators and do so with this framework?
I'll say this. One of the most important things you need to have in order to be a good negotiator is creativity. And you need to be able to reconceptualize what we think of as value. Because if we just think about it myopically and focus only on dollars and cents, we're going to miss a lot of the negotiable opportunities in our lives. So, for instance, with the negotiation that I just described with procurement, if we think about it in terms of value, overall value, what is valuable to us? What is valuable to them? For us in this situation, we're trying to get a discount that's incredibly valuable for them, for us. Now, what's valuable for them? Yes, making more money, but also opportunities. So, for instance, if I were Chris and I had the top coffee podcast on iTunes, what I would do is this. I would say, listen, I know you're trying to get new business. I'm trying to save a little bit of money. If you're able to give me this deal, I'll have you on my podcast and I'll expose your business to thousands of coffee aficionados around the world. Whoa, there's some value. Absolutely. Here's your discount. There you go. And one of the keys to negotiating effectively is trading things of unequal value. Now, for Chris, for you, that is not anything that costs you money. You're getting great content, you win. And you're getting a discount, you win. And they win because even though they're giving you a discount, they're making themselves available to new business opportunities. And so thinking creatively will avail yourself to new negotiable opportunities. So think creatively and then continue to hone your skills. Shameless plug, listen to podcasts like the Negotiate Anything podcast so you can become better negotiators and try to get yourself opportunities to actually engage in training with live negotiation simulations so you can continue to hone your skills and get more for yourself and for your business.
Awesome. This has been fantastic. Speaking of podcasts, how can people learn more and continue this journey of becoming better negotiators and get in contact with you, buy your book?
Definitely, yeah. So the best way to get in touch with me would be through LinkedIn if you just want to connect in general. If you're looking for a workshop, just go to the American Negotiation Institute website, and there is a workshop spreadsheet that you can use to fill it out if you're interested in that. And then the book, of course. It's called Nobody Will Play With Me. And in order to understand the title of the book, you're going to have to read it, or at least the free intro that's on Kindle. But yeah, those are the best ways to keep in touch with me.
Well, thank you so much, Kwame. Again, this is a great conversation, such a useful one, too, and I really appreciate your expertise and the time you've taken to explain things today. Thank you.
My pleasure. Thanks for the invite, Chris.
Well, I think you'll agree with me that this was just a fantastic exploration of the subject of negotiation, and it broke down a lot of barriers in my mind, around the subject where I had this bias against it. Like I said in the beginning of the show, and as we talked about in the conversation, this type of stuff sometimes seems like it's not something we should learn how to do well for fear of being inhumane. But the most humane thing we can do is learn how to acknowledge our own emotions, the emotions of others, and to advocate for the benefit of ourselves and for our businesses and those that we're responsible for. And as we become better at that, we become better leaders. And when we take the first step to bring empathy and bring compassion into these necessary negotiations that happen, no matter if we want them to or not, then it's more likely that others will take that step too. So a big thank you to Kwame for joining us on the show and breaking this subject down in such an eloquent way, demystifying this for us in a fashion that we can apply it to wherever we are in the professional world. I really appreciate your time and your efforts in just bringing this message to the masses. Thank you so much, Kwame. Now, if you want to buy Kwame's book, you can just go to Amazon.com and search for Nobody Will Play With Me, How to Use Compassionate Curiosity to Find Confidence in Conflict. We'll have a link to that in the show notes. I definitely recommend getting that book. It's not a very long read, but it's packed with the kind of practical insights that you heard in this conversation today. So be sure to grab that. And as always, if you want the show notes for this episode, you can go to keystotheshop.com. On the sidebar, there's a place for you to put your email address. And when you do that, you'll be signed up for the newsletter. It comes out every other week. There'll be the show notes in that. Those are just the highlights and the takeaways from each episode, as well as a downloadable PDF of the transcript of each show. That's a new addition to the newsletter, and some links to some cool, interesting articles or videos that I've found over the course of my reading that I think would really benefit you in your career. So definitely worth signing up for over at keystotheshop.com. Now, if you have questions, comments, or feedback, or you want to start a conversation about having Keys to the Shop Consulting come out and help your business, you can do so by emailing Chris at keystotheshop.com. That's CHRIS at keystotheshop.com. I look forward to hearing from you. And that's it for today's show. I really appreciate you taking the time to listen today, to join me in learning about conflict and negotiation and how to do it well. It's really been fun to spend this time with you. And as always, I hope that this episode has truly given you keys to the shop.